Hello, welcome to Season 11 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. This season, in each episode, we will not both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about it later. We have 10 previous seasons of doing exactly that, and it's time for something new. This season, each episode will focus on a larger horror topic, trend, or maybe even rumor. We'll speculate about upcoming movies, debate genre definitions, and do our best to apply the perspective of two people who have watched way too many horror movies to different types of horror media. Thanks for coming along for the ride.
All right, we are recording Season 11, Episode 1 for the first time.
G'day, mate.
Hello, sir.
How's it going?
It's going great. I've never been happier.
Good. Glad to hear it. I am excited. We are here in the first official episode of Season 11, and we're changing things up this season. And just in case you didn't listen to the intro, in Season 11, we're going to break up our format a little bit. For Seasons 1 through 10, each week we watched a movie separately and then got together to talk about it. And each episode focused on a single movie and did kind of a deep dive into it. And if that's what you're looking for, we have well over 200 episodes that you could go back and listen to. But for Season 11, we are going to pick different horror topics and kind of dive in and do a little bit more like cross-movie, drawing on the experience that we've had of doing these types of episodes for a really long time and watching a lot of horror movies. And this week, we are going to talk about subgenres of horror.
Love it.
Now, have you ever, before we decided to do this episode, had you ever Googled subgenres of horror?
I honestly haven't. And I don't know why, but I've never.
I guess it's stupid, but I just assumed there would be more of a consensus. And spoiler warning, there's not. We kind of narrowed down some sources to look at, and we're going to go through them and talk about like the way that they divide things up. But I think at a higher level, there's certain things that, you know, if you asked like, what's your favorite type of horror movie? Because they're really kind of all over the place. I mean, like, no two horror movies are really ever going to be exactly the same for the most part, at least not ones that we like. And I think probably your first answer would be slasher.
Yeah, I would say that.
And I think mine is probably going to be psychological.
Yeah.
But then you have things like zombie. And it's like, well, you have a zombie movie, and that's like a creature. But then there's also like creatures like Creature from the Black Lagoon, and then there's vampires. And how does all of that really fit into the way that we would categorize horror movies? And why does that even matter, right? Like, what is the point of making the distinction? And so that's kind of the type of stuff we're going to get into today.
Yeah, it's something that, here's the deal. By the end of this episode, you all should know everything you need to know about the different genres of horror movies. Because there's like 4.
That's a lot of responsibility that you're taking on.
Yeah,
well,
but
it's not for if you ask the Los Angeles Film School.
That's true, but
according to the Los Angeles Film School, there are 10 subgenres of horror.
That's true.
Would you like to hear them?
Yeah, I do actually.
All right. We got demonic, paranormal, monster, slasher, zombie, gore, witchcraft, vampire, psychological, and comedic.
Okay. Let me ask this question.
Okay.
Could demonic, paranormal, and witchcraft all go into the same category?
That was actually the first thing to come to mind for me.
Yeah.
And then the second was, would vampire, zombie, and monster all be the same thing?
Right.
And so kind of looking down into their stuff, and the reason those two things are interesting to me is like demonic, paranormal, witchcraft, in my mind, very clearly are all like the same type of thing. But if I were to think about like a like monster movie versus like a zombie movie or a vampire movie, I feel like a zombie movie is very clearly defined. Like, for the most part, when somebody says it's a zombie movie, you can make some pretty basic assumptions about it and
That's
probably
true.
be right.
Yeah.
I don't know that you could say that with monster or really even vampire.
Yeah. Okay. I can see that because, what you started running into with a lot of vampire is, the last vampire was like this huge, ended up being this huge monster or something, like this almost demonic character or whatever. So I can see that.
And with some of the others, I could maybe see a little bit of overlap between like slasher and gore.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are definitely slashers that aren't super gory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think in general, we got some good stuff here, but I don't know that I would always be able to tell the difference between these. Like, if we watched a movie like maybe Saw,
Right.
I'm not sure if I would categorize that as gore or psychological or maybe both, or how that would work out.
That's a good point. And I think the other thing too to consider is, our characterization of, gore is something that's way different than it was 40 years ago.
Oh, that's a very good point. Yeah.
And so it's like what we'll be talking about, it depends on the year it came out in a way, because, all you ever heard and all I ever talked about in season 9 was, these people passed out at the theater because it was so horrifying. And it's like,
Well, and that's an interesting point too, because some of them have definitely, I feel like, become more defined over time.
That's true.
Like, I feel like gore in 2022 probably makes a lot more sense than if you tried to categorize a horror movie as gore in like 1950.
Yeah. Like M. I think that was one that they were talking about being, it's like, no, M is not gore.
Yeah, right. But then another one that kind of stands out to me is I almost feel like zombie is more consolidated now. Like, I feel like the zombie genre is very set. Whereas I feel like when we were watching some of those movies from the 40s, like I Walked with a Zombie was more kind of like Afro-Caribbean voodoo zombie. And I don't think those movies get made now. I think now if you're making a zombie movie, it's very much like in the vein of modern zombie movies.
Yeah.
So maybe that's one that's become, more distinct over time or almost like more meaningful or consolidated.
Yeah, like it changed from being possession zombies to like toxic spill zombies kind of thing, or virus zombies is something I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of soon.
Yeah. But one thing I do like about this LA Film School article is they do go into a lot more. I feel like they try to be very like descriptive of each of the differences between them. So they'll like compare the subgenres against each other as opposed to just trying to like define one. But one thing, so they had like for paranormal, they said paranormal horror is closely related to the demonic subgenre in that it focuses on characters who aren't living beings. Spirits and ghosts spook viewers and create fear without a physical presence on the screen. But it's not, constricted to specifically demons, which is interesting because I almost wonder if like in different cultures, the idea of like a demon has different connotations. And so paranormal may be like kind of a wider net to be able to cast on that. But anyway, I think that those are all kind of in the right ballpark, but I feel like they also are maybe a little too big. And so we also have a masterclass article about horror movie genres, and it has 8 instead of 10.
And I like less numbers.
Yeah. Less counting, less math for it.
Yeah.
But the options here are psychological, slasher, gore, body horror, found footage, monster horror, paranormal horror, and comedy horror. And I think that this is probably, to me, I like this list more, but there's one thing that really kind of stands out. Or maybe 2. But the first one is just found footage.
Yeah.
To me, that's a different type of thing than like slasher or monster. Found footage is just like the way of assembling the movie. And I think we had like a found footage witch movie, for example, but we also saw a found footage zombie movie, didn't we? Well, I feel like that was from a very early season. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, I mean, we also watched the one when we had that cabin iZombie or was that what it was called? That was like a found footage style.
Yes. Yeah. I can't. It was not iZombie.
Oh,
it was. I think it was just called like Alive or something.
Oh yeah, with a hashtag.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, found footage zombie movie. So we've definitely, to me, found footage is a bit more about the style of presenting it than it is about the contents.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I really like that as much as far as like assembling our list of things we're going to compare back to throughout the season.
Yeah, and I think the problem that happened with found footage was people realized how much you can make off of, like how little you can spend and the potential of making money. Right. So then it's like, as soon as that happens, it's like, now you got these found footage, films out there that are non-horror or, whatever the case is. But yeah.
Yeah.
Now I do have to say some of my favorites is found footage style horror films, but it's like found footage, paranormal, like Paranormal Activity, kind of thing. Yeah. So it's like the paranormal aspect is what I like about it, but the fact that they do found footage is what helps put you like you're watching a family home movie and makes it feel like relatable.
Yeah, and to be completely honest, I don't really like found footage style when there's a lot of action. So,
oh yeah, no,
like when the camera's just like bouncing around and you can't tell what's going on. I think for me it works a lot better in kind of the slower burn, psychological, supernatural type horror movie like Paranormal Activity, where it's just like this still screen where it's like you're seeing something you're not supposed to be seeing and just watching all the edges for something to move that shouldn't be. Like that's just a really creepy setup.
Yeah,
and for me that works a lot better than in other subgenres.
Yeah, and I think if you could do it the other way, but not get carried away with the shakiness, then it can be decent, and I'm thinking of Blair Witch, but also like Wreck, which was, one of the better ones too, but it's, if once you start getting into just shaking so much to cover up bad CGI, then it's like, I'm out. Like I can't.
Yeah.
It's just not worth it to me unless it's trying to be funny, Yeah.
Yeah. Then the longest list that I had was from puzzleboxhorror.com. And so what was funny to me is I feel like we go from like masterclass in LA Film School where they're trying to like be inclusive of like all the styles and cover all their bases, but it's also like academic. So they're like, we have a set list and these are the things we're doing. And then you go to Puzzlebox Horror, which is like made by people who are staunch horror fans. And then let me just rattle through some of these.
Yes, I love it.
We have apocalyptic horror, avant-garde horror, camp horror, cosmic, comedy, dark fantasy, found footage, gore, gothic, Lovecraftian, paranormal, post-apocalyptic, psychological, sci-fi, splatterpunk, and supernatural.
Yeah.
I love that slasher didn't make the cut.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Like we made it through that whole list, and I definitely applaud the extent to which they went to define all this, but that's just crazy.
Yeah. No, like you're saying, this is made by fans, or, by people who like it. Not saying Masterclass wasn't, but, this is definitely one. So I definitely feel like I like this more, except for the avant-garde one, mainly just because I don't like that word. If I'm just being honest with you, I just don't like it word.
But to be fair, under what other category would you put Velvet Buzzsaw?
Yeah, that's true. I think it may have been from like, but maybe it's because like, isn't that what Eraserhead was?
Oh, for sure.
And so it's like, I just wasn't the biggest. So maybe that's why. But yeah, I get it. There's a ton of avant-garde, and we haven't even like touched.
I would say that's not at the top of the list for either of us, but I would most definitely put like Terror Firmer in that too.
Oh yeah.
So some of the ones that have not exactly been hits for us have fallen in that.
Yeah, and like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, that's in there. That's not horror, but it's avant-garde, and I really like that movie. So maybe it's just I don't like words or numbers.
Fair. But yeah, it was just funny because reading that, it kind of made me think of like if you were trying to talk to a metal fan about music.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I missed some. The links at the top don't have them all, so I left out like cosmic horror, folk horror, and there are a few others on this list too, gothic. So yeah, if I will, we should definitely post a link to all these articles so that people can look them up if they want to. But one thing I wanted to talk about with this is they also had true crime listed.
Yes, yeah.
And I actually kind of like the inclusion of that. That was one thing that stood out to me about this list, in that I think that a lot of times true crime has almost been like popularized by Netflix and like all the podcasts that talk about it. But the content is gruesome a lot of times, like really, really darkly disturbing stuff. And I think that gets very much into being on like the borderline of some of the movies we really like, in that they just feel very raw and like they could happen.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, because one of the things with horror is being able to put yourself in their shoes. And so you see that with like, say, like Halloween, where you're looking through the eyes of Michael, and it's like to put you in that movie basically. And true crimes, it's like, okay, well, this is based off of like the movies that are legit based off of it. True crimes, I feel like, are based off of legit stories. These are the Ted Bundys, Jeffrey Dahmer, those types. That's when it's horrifying, because it's like, these are your neighbors, kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And, to me, it seems very much like the thing that makes The Strangers scary is that it could kind of plausibly be like a true crime story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we get that mumbo jumbo at the beginning that's based on true stories. We debunked that one.
Yeah.
But it's definitely an option. And, like when we had our cabin, and we had multiple, I was confident because we had multiple out there, but it's like, hey, this is a situation that could happen.
Oh yeah.
Easily.
Us going out there was very much the intro to any number of horror movies.
For sure.
So, yeah. So yeah, but then I've realized now what I've done. I'm very biased, but the list that I found that I liked the most was on popcornhorror.com. And you really would have a hard time putting together two words that have as positive a connotation in my mind as popcorn and horror.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so this probably isn't even a good list. I'm just drawn to it.
I love popcorn so much, dude.
Yeah. It's the best.
Yeah.
And eating good popcorn while watching a good horror movie is an experience that is transcendent.
Yeah. And my extra thing that I love to have that doesn't involve popcorn but involves movies is an IC2, for the record. Yeah, so if you guys ever want to, treat yourself, you get popcorn, get your IC, watch a movie. You deserve it.
If you've stuck with it this long, you deserve that and more, if you're still listening. But yeah, so my favorite list was on popcornhorror.com.
Mm-hmm.
And they had it broken up between gore and disturbing, psychological, killer, monster, and paranormal.
Yeah. The reason why I like this one, for the record, too, the most, is because under monster, there's a sub little category where you have zombies, where it has undead and virus.
Yes.
And that's what we were kind of talking about with the first list, was these kind of tie to each other,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and the thing that I really like about this, too, is it's a chart that shows kind of some overlap.
Yeah.
So, like, one of the things that is under killer is crime and giallo. But it also shows that has a little bit of bleed over into psychological.
Yeah.
Or, like, home invasion and survival has a bleed over between killer and psychological.
Mm-hmm.
And then like bumpkin and redneck, which in my mind is something like The Hills Have Eyes, kind of bridges the gap between killer and monster because it really draws on both of those. And so in my mind, this one does a good job of kind of putting all that stuff in perspective and allowing for the idea that there has been a lot of bleed over time, and then kind of like categorizing specific movies that are well known as well.
Yeah. I think this is them acknowledging, like, hey, there's not like 100% set for any of these. Like, you're gonna have a lot of in between, and these are them.
Yeah. And we could try to break it down. Like, every one of these boxes could be its own thing.
Yeah.
But, torture, splatter, cannibal, extreme, phobia, madness and paranoia, home invasion and survival, crime and giallo. And it's like, yeah, I mean, those are all things that I feel like are valid ways of categorizing, and we could probably find multiple movies that fit into each one. Mm-hmm. But I kind of like the simplicity of the 5 high-level pillars, and just the acceptance that, some things are gonna be right on the edge.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to complicate these, at the end of the day. What we're talking about is just horror movies, and
it's just something else to argue about. I mean,
well, yeah, that's true. Yeah. But I think, the other thing I really like about this, the popcorn horror, is like, or any of these lists that we've done, like, movies that they recommend, like this would be, Friday the 13th is slasher, like we've seen a lot of these that they have listed.
Oh, for sure.
Which is the other reason why we're doing season 11 like how we're doing it. And so it's like, so we can definitely understand and relate, like, okay, well, yeah, virus zombies are 28 days later. That makes complete sense,
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, too, now that, because, like in our 100 Years of Horror episode, we talked about how horror went from this very kind of like fringe thing to this like very commercially successful thing with the Universal monsters. And then there's kind of been like a pop version of it that's like acceptable, like Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein. But really, to me, that felt very toned down on the horror side. Mm-hmm. But there's always been this undercurrent of like, still creative, boundary pushing, artistic things happening in the horror genre. And really over the last, 10 years or so, it seems like that has become a really acceptable thing in movie making that has really been embraced by other types of movies to help tell their stories more effectively. And I think that's, a lot of what season 10 was about was kind of looking at examples of that. And so why genres matter or subgenres are interesting to me is because it's just like one more layer of the creativity that goes into the movie. Because I think that you can really go one of two ways in making a horror movie now. Like, you can make a classic genre film that is very much like in the vein of one of these things. And maybe you're adding like a fresh twist. Like Train to Busan is very much in the classical tradition of horror movie. Mm-hmm. But it was also just a really good movie, and it did a lot of creative things, and it was in a setting that, most American horror fans had not encountered before. Yeah. And it just felt like kind of a fresh take, even though it was using a lot of very like established elements in that genre. And so I would say that movie was the thing that kind of like, I'm not trying to be ironic, but like breathed some life into the zombie genre. But then on the other hand, we have examples of movies that really span them or like take some, maybe like some tropes of one genre and then mix it with another to do something fresh. So like with 30 Days a Night, it was technically a vampire movie, but to me it felt more like kind of zombie survival.
Something I think would be pretty interesting if I were to make a horror movie, I would want to make every one of these 5 genres for the same series. Right? So we have 5 movies, 5 different genres. That's what we need.
Yeah. No, that would be cool.
But I will say this too, though, like looking at this list on popcornhorror.com, that will link in the description of the episode, I think that this, could easily make an argument that, I think that this could easily make an argument that Nightcrawler is a psychological horror movie.
Oh, I agree. 100%. Yeah.
And honestly, like, a killer / psychological.
Yeah. Also, do you want to know my favorite thing about this movie?
What's that?
It doesn't even acknowledge comedy horror.
Oh.
And I realize that that's a valid genre. It's just one that I don't like.
Not even Tucker and Dale vs. Evil?
The one exception proves the rule, okay?
Not about even Tommy Two Dick being in there?
Yeah.
Was that his name?
I forgot all about him. I think it was Alan.
I think that is definitely an exception. You know what? I think one oversight that you should have caught, but I'm going to catch it.
What's that?
That teen horror is not on here.
But is that its own thing? Or
it
is
was
that
in
just,
the 90s.
Or is that
2000s.
just a filter that they put on other ones? Or is that just like I Know What You Did Last Summer, the Train to Busan of the slasher genre?
Well, actually,
you know what I mean?
I think that poses a good question. What defines a genre? One movie? 2 movies? You know? Because we had, like, think about it. You had, like, Faculty. You had I Know What You Did Last Summer. You had Scream. I mean, we watched one, Truth or Dare, that seemed like that. Or whichever one they ended up in Mexico in. But I'm thankful that it's not there.
Yeah. I think that there are probably teen movies, though I almost see that as more of like a marketing term, or like a way that they try to sell stuff that's done in these others. Because I would think of The Faculty as being more like a monster.
I think you could say that about any genre, though. Right? So, like, you could say that The Grudge is paranormal. But could that have been, or I guess that's a bad example, but you could say, like, 28 Days Later is zombie, but it's just a monster movie, so why not just say monster movies? You know what I mean?
Well, but on this chart, zombies are a subgenre of the monster subgenre.
Right, and teen horror is not a sub of any of them.
Yeah.
But it would be like a sub. So in season 22, when we get here, we might go through sub genres. I just like that it wasn't, because it is almost like kind of frustrating, because I did like some of them, and because that was like my age, that's like who they were making them for, was our age people, but I just like that none of them are really acknowledging that.
Yeah,
it's like, just let me have it.
Yeah, I feel like the genre films are a really good barometer of culture at the time they were made.
Yeah.
And I feel like when you have kind of that like established formula, then when it gets like a reboot or like a fresh, entry into the canon, then a lot of times it's, okay, well, we have the basics of our story because we know what these types of movies are, but now we're going to try and present them in a way that we think makes them appealing to a mass audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so so thinking about like with Scream, that was kind of like a slasher movie, but that was also an extremely 90s movie. I mean, like, it had as much, it was definitely like in that slasher subgenre, but it had as much in common as, some of the really like popular TV shows of the day and other kind of more romantic comedy movies and stuff as it did with horror. And then you think about like the 2003 remake of Texas Chainsaw. And like, yeah, that's also very much a slasher movie, but it was really an early 2000s kind of teen horror movie in that it reflected, kind of the same cultural stuff that was in other movies targeted towards teens and the things that people thought were cool and the way that they talked and the way that they dressed and the way that they thought that actress was really pretty. It's just like, I feel like that's an interesting thing to look at, sort of these exercises in the genres over time, because they tell you a lot about what was going on at that time.
Yeah, I think I could definitely see both ways. I definitely understand what you're saying more now than before, because it's like teen, just because it has teens, it doesn't make it what it is. I I think on the other side of it, though, that they all had similar flow and similar problems and everything, where it could technically define its own style.
Yeah, I almost see it as like pop horror.
Yeah,
being like a horizontal thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So like we have all of these vertical subgenres, but there are also some trends that we see going the opposite direction too. So maybe that's where like the found footage horror would fit in, or pop horror, teen horror, stuff like that. So
yeah, and I think though we need
three-dimensional categorizations here.
We're
man.
doing good, dude.
Crazy.
We're doing so good. I think though that's the question I think we should ask. The listeners, like, would you categorize teen horror, or where would you? Is it based off the movie, or am I right? Yeah. I mean, everyone's gonna say it's based off the movie, just so I can be wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, definitely. So that's been however many minutes it's been of us talking on this topic. We would love to hear from some listeners what they think about horror subgenres, and if you are generally in favor of a smaller number with lots of like distinct categories, or like kind of the broader thing at the top. And if you disagree with anything that we've talked about, or you think that we just totally missed something, let us know, because we're going to come back to this topic a lot this season. Yeah. And so the discussion is very much open and going to continue. So
yeah, I mean, I think as long as we all can just agree that slasher is the best genre, then I'm fine.
That's all I need.
Yeah.
So yeah, reach out thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or look us up on Facebook and message us there.
And Instagram.
We have an Instagram?
Yeah, we have like 1 billion followers.
I'm impressed.
No, not really. I half-assed it about how I do everything else.
Wow.
This was good. I love this. This was so exciting.
So yeah, season 11, episode 1. You get what you get. That's where we're at. We will be back next week with something totally different, but not all that totally different.
Yeah, come back for more. Love ya. Yeah,
Mike.
I did that nicely. I hate them, but I did it nicely.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.